morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, I would like to share with you lessons that I have learned over the past decade working with some of the world's most introverted people, software engineers, specifically open source software developers. So, before we get started, obviously, I don't want the meat of this presentation to only be valuable to those in the audience who are themselves software engineers or other technologists. So let us begin with a definition of what open source software is. In brief, open source software is software source code that is made available at no cost to anyone in the world to make use of, to modify so that the software better meets their needs, and, should they choose to do so, to take the changes that they have made and contribute them back to the original creators of the code so that the project is improved for everyone's benefit. The question that I am asked most frequently about open source software is, how exactly is it that this model works? If no one's getting paid, if people are volunteering to program, wait a minute, how does this actually work? And while I think that's a wonderful question, it's one we should explore together during the break tonight. This evening, I'd like to focus on a more fundamental question. How is it that open source software is produced at all? There are no rules for who can be an open source software developer. All that is required is that an individual have a computer, an internet connection, and the ability to program. And we find that open source software developers exist in all countries and collaborate together across all time zones, having different native languages and different cultural backgrounds and experiences. And if we simply just looked at that, those constraints alone would make global collaboration a difficult task. And yet, it's even more interesting when we consider that software developers are folks who would describe themselves as quite shy, people who prefer not to spend time with other people, those for whom social engagements are taxing and exhausting rather than exhilarating. So then, how is it that this group of people are able to come together across time and space to create some of the systems and applications which we take for granted in our daily lives? Everything from our mobile phones to our web browsers to applications like Twitter or Facebook. To me, the most useful way to look at this question is through the lens of the research performed by the individual pictured here, David Eves. David is an expert in negotiation theory, is an advisor to the Government of Canada on their open data policy, and has done extensive research into the science of building communities around open source software projects. Through his research on the Mozilla project, who are the creators of the Firefox web browser, I'm sure many in the audience may be using this tool, and other projects, David has revealed that the most successful projects are those whose leaders and whose members are good at all sorts of soft skills, also known as behavioral competencies or emotional intelligence. Now, this fact seems quite counterintuitive when you consider that we're dealing with a group of folks whom The Economist would have described as antisocial geeks gobbled up by software firms. And it's even more counterintuitive when we consider that we're looking at software projects. It would be only natural to assume that the most successful software projects are those who have the best possible programmers working on them. And then, if we take a step back, it becomes even more counterintuitive when we examine cultural narratives around success. We'll frequently hear that someone was highly successful because they had a cutting sense of the marketplace and were fabulous entrepreneurs, but we will rarely hear that someone was quite successful because they were an excellent communicator. We may hear that someone was quite successful because they were resolute in the face of failure and refused to give up no matter what happened. But we will almost never hear that someone was successful because each individual who spoke with them left the conversation feeling better educated and more empowered to do their own work. So, if our cultural narratives of success don't seem to value these behavioral competencies, and open source software projects are peopled with those people for whom people skills are not their finest skill, how is it that this emotional intelligence is displayed in open source software projects? The most successful open source software project leaders that I have worked with over the past decade are those who first and foremost have learned to embrace failure. No matter how hard it is that we may try, no matter how skilled we may be, and no matter how much time we may devote to a particular task, failure is inevitable. No one thing and no one person is perfect. Successful leaders understand that failure is inevitable, and so, therefore, create systems within their projects to plan for failure to occur, rather than spending a great deal of time attempting to prevent it. And they also create systems so that the learnings from each failure that occurs in their project are rapidly rolled back into the project's processes so that the same mistake is never made twice. One of the most important ways to embrace failure is something that is quite easy to say, but is quite difficult to do, and that is to know what it is that we do not know, where there are gaps in our understanding and our knowledge. A prime example of this from the open source software world comes to us from the Sahana project. The Sahana project is created by the Sahana Software Foundation, a group of software developers creating a platform that provides disaster management to victims of natural disasters. For example, which medications have been delivered by a non-governmental organization that may be deployed in the field, or which hospital has available beds because the local facility is full and there are more patients in need. The leaders of the Sahana Software Foundation are all extremely talented software developers with a wide variety of background working with non-governmental organizations and other aid workers in the event of natural disasters. And yet, as a group, we realized that there were areas where our expertise was lacking that didn't allow us to best serve the needs of our audience. To correct this problem, we created an internship program to bring new and different contributors into the project, specifically folks who are skilled in communications, so that we could better tell the Sahana software story and let more people know that this software was available at no cost. We also increased the diversity of the project through bringing more students in, so that we had a wider range of ages, as well as geographic diversity by bringing in different people from various universities around the world. And finally, we brought in one intern who was actually herself working with an international aid organization on the ground each day. And while disaster preparedness was a part of her work, it was only a minor part. Her task was to do daily relief work. And this perspective helped us to understand the daily circumstances of the aid workers who were served through the software that we created and provided. By increasing this diversity of perspectives, we were able to offer something that was much more valuable to all folks who had come to make use of it, rather than relying on simply our own knowledge. Successful open source software project leaders are those who recognize the importance and value of a wide variety of perspectives and make it an explicit goal to foster diversity in their project communities. For those of you in the audience who may be familiar with the world of open source software, this may seem somewhat counterintuitive. After all, research will tell us that open source software developers are overwhelmingly based in the United States and in Europe, that they are overwhelmingly young, with the median age being around 26 years, that they are overwhelmingly white, and that they are by and large affluent, as measured by the age at which they had their first computer in their home, which even now is a cost that is out of reach for many. Recognizing the fact that they represent only a small niche in terms of the wider breadth of humanity, project leaders who choose to specifically foster diversity in their communities bring in others whose perspectives and knowledge complements their own and makes their work that much more effective. An example of this is the Cash Music Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building a software platform so that independent musicians are able to more widely share their works, their merchandise, and to engage with their fan base without the need for a relationship with a record label or an alternate distribution channel. What I find fascinating about the Cash Music Project is if you look at the project leadership, there is only one individual whose responsibility it is to work on software development. The rest of the board is composed of folks with a background in the music industry, both independent music and major record labels, people who are well-versed in the creation of open source software communities, and people who understand the importance of sharing content via the open web, making everything available to people via the internet and having there be frictionless sharing. By making sure that there is a wide variety of perspectives informing the creation of Cash, the software development team of one is able to ensure that what they have created is most useful to their audience, musicians and their fans, because the needs of a software developer are quite different than the needs of a musician. Last but not least, successful open source software project leaders are those who make it an explicit goal to always share their time. This seems, again, somewhat counterintuitive when we consider that open source software is largely created by folks working in their volunteer time. And these are folks who have the same needs as the rest of us. They have families to care for, they have day jobs, they have hobbies that they want to do, movies they want to see, and yet they make it an explicit goal to spend as much time as possible with the members of their community, sharing their knowledge, history of the project, and other information that is valuable so that they make their entire project community that much more stronger and more vital. These leaders share their knowledge in a wide variety of ways, from giving talks at conferences so that more users and developers can be aware of the software and how it can be used, to having online office hours so that people are able to share their knowledge in a time-boxed way, but there is always a dedicated time for that sharing to occur. By taking the time to do this within their community, they not only give their fellow participants additional knowledge, but they thereby strengthen the community ties so that everyone feels even more engaged with the software project and with one another, leading to a greater end result as each person works together toward their final goal. In closing, I would like to leave you with a similar thought that comes from a world which is diametrically opposed to that of open source software, specifically the financial investment realm. 2 years ago, in Forbes magazine, a prominent venture capitalist was asked to share the secret to his success. His response was, "No matter how busy you may be, always take the opportunity to share your time with anyone who comes to you and asks you for your assistance or your help. This will lead to success because you never know what opportunities may come to you because you took the time to help that individual. And even if no business or personal opportunities come from this dialogue, you never know what you will learn by your interactions with this individual." I would like to encourage everyone in the audience to realize that you too have an audience, which is our entire world, to take the time to take in a wide variety of perspectives and realize that we too all have the opportunity to collaborate and share our time to make this world a more just, beautiful, and wonderful place for all. Thank you.